Hey y'all, I'm out here today with the old fat boy, the Steel FS240R, and I had to restring it today, and I'm going to be using this and the brush cutter and the chainsaw a little bit today, not only for property clearing, but also I've got to cut a whole bunch of wood to size for some more pro cut testing that's going to be coming up very soon, so I'm working on that today. However, I saw a comment last night about the Adventure Craft in which somebody said that the knife would not even cut weed eater line. And I thought that this was an excellent opportunity to talk about edge geometry, the nuances of edge geometry, and why it's important. We're going to demonstrate some of this today, but the Adventure Craft will very, very easily cut weed eater line. So what we're looking at here, now I run this big old 240. It's the biggest professional grade trimmer that Steel makes because I've got a lot of work to do. If I want to maintain my range or the roads on my property, I've got to cut a lot of stuff. So I run my line super, super long on this thing, as long as it will go, without bogging too badly. And I run the thickest professional grade line on it because with all of that power and all of that line length, I need a really high-end line. Since I've swapped over to this line, I haven't needed to swap line nearly as much, but this stuff is by far the hardest line to cut. Now, let's talk about what it takes to cut something like this line and how edge sharpness differs from edge and blade geometry. While we're looking at these things, guys, stock thickness, to judge a knife slicing ability on stock thickness is massively oversimplified. If you want to oversimplify a knife's cutting performance, you look at behind the edge thickness. That is what is important. Now, everywhere except for a few niche markets, I'm going to say kitchen knives especially, but you could almost solely determine a knife's cutting performance almost by behind the edge thickness, because there's not a whole lot of tasks that we do where after the edge the increasing thickness is all that important, especially when it comes to a fixed blade knife. So what am I talking about here? Cardboard cutting is another situation like kitchen knives where the overall blade geometry or primary grind is going to be very important. But for feather sticking, for food, cooked food prep, for skinning and field processing, for all of these things, it's going to be, the blade geometry is going to be secondary to the edge geometry. So I've been doing a lot of sharpness testing here recently. Sharpness plays a huge role in knife performance for very obvious reasons, but blade geometry does as well. The media that you are cutting through has the greatest effect, however, on whether sharpness or blade geometry is the more important factor. And so even with some of the thickest professional grade line on the market, we are still looking at a relatively thin piece of material. I would say definitely less than 1/8 of an inch. The Adventure Craft is 1/8 of an inch thick there, so you can see it's less than that. And the comment was specifically that with the blade stock being so thick, they couldn't even cut weed eater line. And so the reason that I wanted to talk about this is the stock thickness on the knife is irrelevant when it comes to cutting weed eater line. And the reason is because of how small the line itself is. It's all going to come down to sharpness. So edge geometry really, stock thickness is an important part of your blade and edge geometry. We're 1/8 of an inch thick here, obviously. And the other end of your blade geometry and edge geometry is your edge thickness. And that is this measurement right behind the sharpened portion of the blade. On the Adventure Crafts, this comes in a good bit below 20 thou behind the edge. And so when I use this knife for meal prep, the blade geometry is a little bit thick for the intended uses of the knife. It gets used a lot for batoning and feather sticking and stuff like that. I also use the knife for meal prep. And where I notice thickness with the edge geometry is mostly with cutting potatoes. You see, if you're cutting something thin, like this line, or let's say you're skinning an animal and you're doing deer hide and you're just getting it separated from the meat, the edge geometry is not actually super important, because once the edge thickness, once the actual edge has cut through the material, the cutting's done. Whereas if you're cutting, let's say, potatoes or sweet potatoes or thick cardboard, the friction along the primary bevel here can make cutting difficult, even if the edge is extremely sharp. So we are at below 20 thou behind the edge on the Adventure Craft, considerably lower than what you're going to find on most production knives. And we have over here a Creeley Mako. And unless you are a chef, this is very likely thinner than anything else you're going to find. We're at about 10 thou behind the edge on a high full flat grind on some thin stock thickness. This isn't a 16th, but it's not an 1/8. I don't know exactly what it is off the top of my head. And so when I go to cut this line, it is easier. But it's easier actually because my Adventure Craft isn't as sharp as it should be, to be honest. How much easier is it? Well, not that much easier. I still have to use a decent bit of force. And so that's going to come down to, first, behind the edge thickness is going to determine outright cutting performance, and then sharpness. Now, what if we take a bigger knife here? This is the Warhammer for Work Tough Gear. By the way, I'll put links to both Creeley knives and to Work Tough Gear in the description box below. This knife is a 1/4 inch thick at the spine, and it's about as thick behind the edge likely as the Adventure Craft stock thickness is entirely. And so how is this going to cut weed eater line? And I have never sharpened this knife, and it's been abused. All right, not very difficult. A little bit awkward, admittedly, because of the way that I did it. Where'd the end of my line go? All right, let's do this better. Grab the knife as we should. Easy, like nothing to it. In fact, even potentially easier because of the amount of leverage we get from the handle, but nothing to it when I just hold the knife less like a maroon. To add to that point, I have a knife, the Tops 3-pointer, I think it is. It's also an 1/8 of an inch thick. It's got a much higher grind than the Adventure Craft, but the behind the edge thickness is like 35 or 40 thou, over twice as thick. This Adventure Craft will absolutely cut circles around that knife despite the fact that it has a shorter grind. And even though the grind is shorter, it's still thinner basically all the way up because the edge thickness is so much thinner. To wrap this up, here's the issue. Marketing. I run businesses. Marketing is incredibly important. Companies like Coca-Cola spend more in a week on marketing than you will make in your entire life, even though they're already the most internationally recognized word, not just brand, but word. All right, so it is more cost effective to use people's preconceived notions and oversimplified truths. It's more cost effective to market to that than it is to use your marketing to educate. That is incredibly expensive to do. It's incredibly difficult to do. It's the route that I want to take, but it's not the route that makes sense if you just want to make money. People become offended if your marketing tries to bring their understanding up because they think, oh, they think I'm stupid. All right? If instead you make them feel smart by bringing your marketing down to their understanding, you can make money by selling what they already expect to receive. The issue with edge geometry and blade geometry is almost no manufacturer is advertising their behind the edge thickness. It is the #1 most important attribute to any knife's performance, both for slicing ability and cutting ability and for toughness. In fact, Laren Thomas explained when it comes to knife steel that you can modify your knife, and just by laying back the angle of the edge on your knife a few degrees, your knife, like a CPM 154, can perform similar to like an S90V in edge retention just by altering your edge geometry. So it's easy to market steels and hardness to people. Everybody's like, oh, I'd like this knife better if it was this hardness. This knife should have been this hardness. This knife should have been this steel. That's easy. And so all you do is you make a product that doesn't hardly cost you anymore. You make it 2 points harder on the Rockwell scale. It's infinitely harder to consistently have a behind the edge thickness, knife to knife and batch to batch, over and over and over again, and actually advertise your behind the edge thickness and advertise something that actually matters, and to educate people enough for them to know that it matters. Who's got time for that? Just slap another couple of points of hardness on there. You know, all that means is in your atmospheric heat treating kiln, instead of 1 or 2 bars of pressure, you have like 10 or 12 bars of pressure, whatever the case may be. Bump that Rockwell up, boom, sales. You don't have to educate people. You don't have to improve people. You don't have to improve the industry. All you have to do is advertise something as simple as higher number equals more better. It's like what they used to do in the industry with simple carbon steels is 1095 is the best because it's the highest carbon. You know, 1070, not very good. 1080, a little bit better. 1095, yeah, it's the best because the number is highest. Or your fuel, higher octane equal more better, more power. 87, poo-poo. 90, good. 93, really good. Well, if your car doesn't need 93, if you've got a low compression engine, you get no benefit from your higher octane. It's stupid. It's not, you know, it may have extra cleaning additives in it, but you probably don't need that either, especially if, anyways. So, I hope you've learned something about blade and edge geometry today. I'm sure that the way that I demonstrated this is subpar in many ways, but if you learned something from it, let me know in the comment section below. If you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comment section below. And if you think your friend could learn something from this video, definitely share it with them. Check out the description box below to see how you can support this channel, and I will also have links to Creeley knives and to Work Tough gear there as well. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you in the comment section below, and I hope that you have a blessed day.